Hello, everyone. In today's lecture, we will be discussing qualitative research. The author of your textbook discusses qualitative research, and he states that there is no specific definition of qualitative research, but rather it is a group of methods. So I'm going to go over the key characteristics of qualitative research in the next few slides. So qualitative research is a process of naturalistic inquiry that seeks an in-depth understanding of social phenomena or also a better understanding of an individual or group. And as I had mentioned last week, it focuses on the why rather than the what of social phenomena, and it relies on the direct experience of human beings as meaning-making agents of their everyday lives. So when should you use qualitative research? You should use qualitative research to better understand the concepts, thoughts, or experiences. And when you want to understand the why and how of a phenomenon or how an experience occurs, and also when your topic is not well understood. So what are some key characteristics of qualitative research? So one of them is flexibility. What this means is that flexibility is a method and procedure during the conduct of the study, often in response to findings that emerge. So in this case, qualitative research, we use collection of the data in an unstructured or semi-structured way to describe the phenomenon of interest in the words of action or actions of those who live them. So again, qualitative methods are more flexible. So what this means is that it allows for greater flexibility or spontaneity and adaptation of the interaction between the researcher and the study participant. So for example, qualitative methods mostly use open-ended or semi-structured questions that are not necessarily worded in exactly the same way for each participant. So for open-ended or semi-structured questions, participants are more free to respond in their own words, and these responses tend to be more than just a yes or no. So some advantages of these is that, again, qualitative research is more exploratory. Yeah, and they allow participants to ask why or how, and the researcher must listen carefully to what the participants say, engage with them, depending on their individual styles, and they can use probes to encourage them to elaborate on their answers. So another key characteristic is observational decisions made by the study, and also, well, again, as we discussed, it is flexible. It can collect data in a structured or semi-structured way to probe more in depth and learn more about the experiences of how people are living or experiencing an event or situation. And adaptations can be made along the way. So if you're using unstructured or semi-structured questions, those can be adapted along the way. Another characteristic is that the scope of the study includes the observational context of the study. So usually the one in which the phenomenon of interest naturally occurs, as well as the decisions made during the conduct of the study. So those, again, can be more subjective and more flexible. And these subjective experiences of the researcher and research participants can be used as data, and also they can be used in the analysis of the data. So let's now talk about the different roles a researcher can play in qualitative research. So in qualitative research, a researcher can serve as a complete participant. So what this means is that they can become a full participant in the activity, program, or community that is being observed. They can become participant as observer, which means that they can become full participant, but they don't deceive participants. They're only observers, but they don't deceive participants or make them believe that they're also participants. They can be a server as participant, which means that they can identify as a researcher and not actively participate. They can participate some and also maybe not at all. They can also be complete observer and not become part of a group at all, and participants may not even be aware that they're an observer. So some things that we need to consider when thinking about the role of the researcher in terms of ethics is, again, the complex relationship between researcher and participant, the difficulty of objectivity, and how the researcher can step away. And as we talked about ethics before, you can remember one of the studies. And Lord Humphrey's study in which he observed men having sex with men in public restrooms. And he was permitted to watch acts because people didn't know he was a researcher, and that he followed people to their homes. So that broke or that caused an ethical issue. So we need to keep that in mind. So now let's talk about qualitative research techniques. Let's start off with sampling techniques. So how do we recruit and the sample for our study? So these are some different ways that we can use in qualitative study. One of them is called snowball sampling. So in this type of sampling, the researcher begins with a small population of known individuals, and then the researcher expands the sample by asking those initial participants to identify others that should participate in the study. So for example, I conducted a study in Indiana years ago. So we started making connections with trusted community leaders, church leaders, and those leaders referred us to different families in the community. So once we had already interviewed some of those immigrant families, they recommended us to contact other participants who met the qualifications for the study. Another sampling technique is called purposive sampling. So in this sampling, the researcher relies on their own judgment when choosing members of the population to participate in the interview. So again, this involves identifying and selecting individuals or groups that are particularly knowledgeable about an experience with a phenomenon. So for example, for our study that we are conducting in Doña Ana County, that we already conducted part of the study, we purposely selected people from specific agencies at the city, county, and state level. We selected government officials, people working in, again, in different agencies that we thought should be represented in the study. So again, you purposely select participants that you know that are gonna be knowledgeable on your topic. The other type of sampling technique, it's called quota sampling. And so for this type of technique, you set a quota based on demographics. Um, so for example, if you want to ensure that a next number of Latinos, a next number of whites, a next number of African American participants are part of your study, that would be quota sampling. If you want to compare perspectives or ensure representation of different groups. So now let's talk about data collection techniques. So in data collection techniques for qualitative studies, you can use in-person interviews. And these in-person interviews can be structured in which the questions are planned and created in advance, and all participants are asked the same question in the same order. So the advantage of these would be that you will be able to compare answers and you will be able to quantify the responses. In semi-structured interviews, you would have an interview guide with a list of questions and topics to be covered during the presentation. And you can ask them in the particular order, but even though you have a guide, you can also ask probing questions that may stray away from the guide if you feel that it is appropriate to ask probing questions to get more information from the participant. Focus groups and key informant interviews, they're similar. It is a small group that discusses a topic of interest, and that can be in a structured, unstructured, or semi-structured way. Systematic observations, again, those can be structured, semi-structured, unstructured, and you can use logs to record the observations. You can do field journals. You can use audio or visual recording. And you can also, again, take notes along the way of what you believe is happening in the situation. Secondary data, you can also use data that has already been collected by another researcher. You can use client logs, either to gather quantitative or qualitative data. So logs that you have gathered from your clients. Of course, we get into the that you would have to be careful so that you're not breaking any ethics, and that you're not revealing any client's information. So now let's take a look at data analysis techniques. Content and thematic analyses are very similar, in which you look for patterns as well as contradictions within the interview transcriptions or data. The difference is that content analysis focuses more on doing a quantitative count of the different codes that are coming up from the data. So quotes are different patterns, again, that are coming up from the data. And thematic analyses, you do more, you can also do a frequency count, but normally it also includes doing different connections between the different codes or data, and also looking more in depth. and providing a more rich description of the data and of the connection or the analysis that you're doing with the data. Narrative analysis is a method that involves doing a reformulation of stories presented by respondents, taking account the context of each case and different experiences of each respondent. Grounded theory focuses on formulating theory. So you can analyze a single case in order to formulate a theory. Some other data analysis techniques that are important to use is, again, the coding process is a process of reading through the different transcripts, conceptualizing and operationalizing content in order to identify and classify it into different patterns or themes. Memoing is basically taking notes in the research process of what comes to your mind as you're going through the research of maybe different connections or analyses that you're making. And concept mapping is the use of graphics, flow charts to map out the researcher's thought process. So now let's talk about the qualitative research paradigms. So one of the paradigms that you can use is called a case study. So a case study is a research approach that is used to generate more in-depth and multifaceted understanding of an individual, group, or event, or a complex issue in a real life context. So for example, we can learn more about domestic violence among immigrant families in Las Cruces, New Mexico. We can also learn more about sexual violence and rape experiences among students at New Mexico State University. So it is more descriptive, and this should be used when very little is known in this area of study, and it is impossible to draw a representative sample. Grounded theory is a research method concerned with the generation of theory. So during this type of study or methodology, it involves the construction of a hypothesis and theories through the collecting and analysis of the data. And again, it is used to uncover such things as social relationships and behaviors, and known as social processes. So for example, I could do a grounded theory study to better understand like why some immigrants in Doña Ana County are able to access social services effectively while others cannot. So I would learn about the different elements that are helping one group and that are serving as a barrier for others, and they're not able to access services effectively and appropriately. Ethnographic research, it is descriptive, uses observation. So again, this is where you would become a participant. You would become an insider to the group to learn about the perspective of the group that you are researching. And again, you will need to decide what type of participant do you want to become. Do you want to become a participant observer? Do you want to become a full participant? So an example of this type of research would be an anthropologist traveling to another country and living within that society for different years and researching the people and culture through the process of observation and participation. So you would need to have detailed documentation of what you are experiencing. Cross-cultural research, this is a systematic study that focuses on studying multiple cultures involving the observation of the similarities and differences in values, practices in different societies. And it is more descriptive in nature. Feminist research is also a paradigm, and it seeks to actively remove the power imbalance between researcher and participant. So it focuses on women's way of knowing, and you can use a combination of the different methods that I discussed. Again, it focuses on women's perspective, and it is a response to sexism in research. And it can use semi-structured or open-ended questionnaires. And it involves, again, understanding the experiences of women, doing reflexibility, so to ensure that the researcher is not being biased, and oftentimes it involves using participatory research methods and taking action to change social inequality. And it begins with the standpoints and experiences of women. And participatory action research, or PAR, sometimes it's also called community-based participatory research, is a framework for conducting research and generating knowledge centered on the belief that the ones who have been the most impacted by an issue should be the ones taking the lead and framing the question, the design and methods of the research project. Therefore, like for example, with the research study that we have been conducting in Doña Ana County, we created an advisory group made up of different individuals, including frontline workers and families who can provide their perspective on the study throughout the process, including developing the questions, the design, and also the analysis, letting us know, providing us with feedback if we're interpreting the information correctly or not, and also providing us with feedback about what should be done with the information that we are collecting and what steps we need to take next. And throughout this process, we empower participants so that they can make change happen to the situations that they're experiencing in their lives. So finally, let's talk about trustworthiness or validity. So what this means is that as researchers, we need to demonstrate that data analysis or the entire research process that has been conducted is precise, consistent, in the manner that we systematize and disclose our methods in detail, so that the reader or the audience determines whether our process is credible or not. So what credibility means in research and qualitative research specifically is how confident the qualitative researcher is in the truth of the research study findings, so the truth and value. So what strategies can researchers, qualitative researchers use to ensure credibility? One of them is prolonged engagement, or as I mentioned earlier, participation and knowing the participants and their context well. Peer debriefing or peer briefing means that another researcher is made part of the study. They review the data to make sure that that the first researcher analyses or conclusions are appropriate. Triangulation refers to using multiple data sources. So for example, gathering data in different times of day or the year, collecting data in different sites, or gathering data on different people. So I would not just so in the case of the study that we're conducting in Doña Ana County, we're interviewing frontline workers, agency executive directors, government officials, and families to learn about this phenomenon or issue through the perspective of different people. Member checks is allowing those who participated in the study to provide feedback about whether you're analyzing the data correctly. So for example, as I mentioned earlier, we have an advisory group. And the advisory group, we present our results and findings to them, and then provide feedback about whether we are missing any perspective that we should be including. Transferability refers to the degree to which the results of qualitative research can be generalized or transferred to other contexts. So it is important that we provide thick descriptions and describe not just the behaviors and experiences, but their context as well, so that we know or the reader understands and those experiences become meaningful to the reader as well. And another technique is doing purposive sampling, so ensuring that a specific type of people who are knowledgeable should be part of the sample. Dependability involves evaluation of the findings, interpretation and recommendations of the study, such as that also are supported by the data. So as part of this, we should use audit trail. So what an audit trail refers to is describing the research steps that were taken from the start of the project to the development of the project and reporting of the findings. And these records should be kept throughout the study. Again, triangulation, we already talked about how different sources of data should be used. For confirmability, that it refers to the degree to which the findings of the research study could be confirmed by other researchers, or it also refers to the neutrality of the research. So this would also involve using triangulation and reflexibility. So reflexibility also is another area, and it refers to the critical self-reflection about oneself as a researcher, about one's biases, preconceptions, and preferences, and the research relationship to the participant and how that relationship may impact the participant's answer. So for example, if you are interviewing a client, what are the ethics involved with that, and how may their responses be different? So again, today's lecture focused on qualitative research, what it is, when you should use it, the different techniques related to qualitative research, and also the trustworthiness or validity, how to evaluate trustworthiness and validity of qualitative research. Well, thank you, and I hope you enjoy your week.